The conference room went silent when I asked for the raise. I'd spent 3 years driving record revenue for Patterson Industries, and my numbers spoke louder than any pitch I could make. Our division had grown 340% under my leadership. I'd brought in clients nobody thought we could land. I wasn't asking for a favor. I was asking for what I'd earned. My new boss, Derek Hastings, leaned back in his chair and smiled. Not the warm kind of smile. The kind that made my stomach turn cold. "You know what your problem is," he said, loud enough for the entire executive team to hear. "You think you're irreplaceable." I felt my face flush. Around the table, eyes dropped to notepads. Nobody said a word. "You're not," Derek continued. "In fact, I'm reassigning the Vertex project to Kyle. He's got fresh energy. You'll support him as needed." Kyle was Derek's former assistant. 24 years old. Nice kid, but he'd never closed a deal in his life. I sat there, hands folded, forcing myself to breathe normally. This wasn't just unfair. This was personal. And I knew right then that Derek Hastings had just made the biggest mistake of his career. The Vertex deal wasn't just any project. It was a $30 million contract I'd been nurturing for 2 years. My name is Alexis Turner, and I'd built my entire career on relationships like this one. I'd flown to Singapore 4 times. I'd had dinner with their CEO's family. I knew their daughter's college plans and their CFO's concerns about supply chain risks. This deal was my crown jewel. It represented the largest contract Patterson Industries had ever pursued. If we landed it, our stock price would jump. Bonuses would flow. The company would enter a completely new market tier. I'd built the entire proposal from scratch. I'd negotiated terms through 17 drafts. I'd convinced our manufacturing team to adjust production timelines specifically for Vertex's needs. And now Derek was handing it to Kyle like a participation trophy. The worst part. Derek immediately called a company-wide meeting and announced that he had secured Vertex's interest through his strategic vision. My name wasn't mentioned once. Every document I'd created suddenly listed Derek as primary contact. I watched it happen in real time. My work, my relationships, my deal, all being erased like I'd never existed. 3 days after the announcement, my phone buzzed with an international number. It was James Sullivan from Vertex Industries, their executive vice president. "Alexis, I'm confused," he said carefully. "We've been working with you for 2 years. Now there's a new contact listed, and frankly, we're concerned about continuity." My throat tightened. The company restructured some responsibilities. Without telling us. His tone sharpened. "We trusted you specifically. Your understanding of our operational needs, your attention to cultural considerations during negotiations, that's why we've stayed engaged." He paused, and I could hear him choosing his words carefully. "Between you and me," he said quietly, "if you're not leading this deal, we're seriously reconsidering our partnership with Patterson." I sat in my car in the parking garage, phone pressed to my ear, and made a decision that would change everything. "I appreciate your confidence," I said. "Let me see what I can do." I didn't tell Derek about that call. Not yet. Because I just realized something powerful. I held all the cards. I didn't quit. I didn't scream. I didn't storm into Derek's office demanding justice. Instead, I did something much smarter. I started documenting everything. I backed up every email I'd ever sent about Vertex. I saved voice memos from client calls. I printed meeting notes with timestamps. I created a detailed timeline showing exactly who had done what work on the deal. Then I started paying closer attention to how Derek operated. I noticed expense reports that didn't quite match the receipts. I saw vendor invoices that seemed inflated compared to market rates. I watched Derek approve procurement shortcuts that violated company policy. He was sloppy. Arrogant people always are. They believe their position protects them from consequences. I created a private folder on my personal cloud storage. Every night I'd add new evidence. Communications. Financial irregularities. Policy violations. grew thicker by the week. My coworkers asked if I was okay. They'd witnessed my public humiliation. They expected me to be angry or defeated. I smiled and said I was fine. And I was. Because I wasn't reacting anymore. I was planning. 2 weeks after my demotion, the whispers started. She's difficult to work with. She's emotional and can't handle feedback. Her best days are behind her. I heard these things third-hand, but I knew where they originated. Derek was building a narrative. If I complained about being demoted, he wanted everyone to think I deserved it. HR called me in for a performance review conversation. The woman across from me, Paula Vincent, looked uncomfortable as she read from her notes. "We've received feedback that you've been resistant to new leadership structures," she said. "From whom?" I asked calmly. She shifted in her seat. "I can't disclose that." "What specific incidents support this feedback?" Silence. "Have any clients complained about my work?" "No," she admitted. "Have I missed deadlines or produced substandard deliverables?" "Not that I'm aware of." Smiled. "Then this sounds like a solution looking for a problem." Paula's expression told me she agreed, but her hands were tied. HR doesn't protect employees. HR protects the company from employees. I left that meeting and added the documentation to my growing file. The LinkedIn message appeared on a Tuesday morning. "I've been following your work at Patterson. We should talk." The sender was Victoria Hayes, senior recruiter at Titan Point Solutions, Patterson's biggest competitor. We met for coffee at a place far from both our offices. Victoria was direct. "We know what happened with your promotion situation," she said. "Derek's reputation precedes him. Brilliant at politics, terrible at leadership." I sipped my coffee and said nothing. "We're building a new enterprise division," she continued. "We need someone who understands complex B2B relationships. Someone with your track record." "What's the role?" "Yes. Senior Vice President of Strategic Partnerships. Equity package included. You'd build your own team." The offer was generous. Very generous. But Victoria wasn't done. "I'll be honest," she said. "We've been trying to break into the markets you've been developing. If someone with your client relationships joined us, it would be transformational." I met her eyes. "You're asking me to bring clients with me." "I'm asking if you'd be interested in leading deals you actually own." I told her I'd think about it. But I'd already started calculating the angles. Kyle's first presentation to Vertex was a disaster. I wasn't in the room, but I heard about it from 3 different people. He'd mispronounced the CEO's name. He'd confused their product lines. He'd proposed timeline adjustments that directly contradicted what I'd already negotiated. The Vertex team sat in polite silence, then asked to speak with me directly. Derek's assistant came to my desk, flustered. "Derek needs you in conference room B immediately." Derek was pacing when I arrived. Kyle looked like he might cry. "Vertex wants to talk to you," Derek said tightly. "Apparently there's been some miscommunication about project specifications." "What kind of miscommunication?" "Yes. Just fix it," he snapped. "This deal can't fall apart." Took the call. James Sullivan's voice was strained but professional. "We need clarity on whether Patterson Industries is serious about this partnership," he said. "Because today's meeting raised serious concerns." "I understand," I said carefully. "What would help rebuild confidence?" "Honestly, having you back in the lead role." Derek was listening on mute. I watched his jaw clench. I didn't push. I just promised to follow up and ended the call professionally. Derek didn't thank me. He just left the room. 4 days later, Derek invited me for coffee. His tone was friendly, almost apologetic. Made my skin crawl. "I think we got off on the wrong foot," he said, stirring sugar into his espresso. "I was under pressure from the board to make changes quickly. Maybe I moved too fast." "Maybe," I agreed. "I want you to know I see your value," he continued. "The Vertex situation showed me that client relationships matter. I'm thinking about restructuring the team again. There could be opportunities for you. I nodded, letting him talk. Between you and me, he leaned in conspiratorially. I had to establish dominance when I came in. The previous leadership was too soft. People needed to know there was a new sheriff in town. You understand, right? I understood perfectly. And I also understood that my phone was recording our entire conversation in my jacket pocket. Of course, I said. Leadership requires difficult decisions. He smiled, relieved. Exactly. I knew you'd get it. Let's revisit your compensation in Q3. That recording would become the most valuable evidence I'd ever collected. Victoria called again 2 weeks later. This time the offer had evolved. We're prepared to make you VP of Enterprise Solutions, she said. Base salary 40% above your current rate. Equity vesting over 4 years. And here's the interesting part. We'd want your insights on Patterson's market positioning. You mean competitive intelligence, I said. I mean understanding where Patterson is vulnerable so we can position ourselves effectively. I'd never considered corporate espionage before. But I'd also never been publicly humiliated and systematically undermined. What exactly would you want to know? Yes. Client relationships that might be ready to switch. Operational weaknesses. Procurement patterns. I thought about Derek's inflated vendor invoices. His policy shortcuts. His arrogance. I'd need to think carefully about what I'm comfortable sharing, I said. I have ethics. Of course, Victoria said. But ethics and honesty aren't the same as loyalty to people who don't respect you. She had a point. I told her I'd consider the offer. But I didn't sign anything yet. I was playing both sides, collecting leverage, waiting for the perfect moment. The email from Vertex landed like a bomb. We are formally requesting that negotiations be led by the original account manager. If this arrangement cannot be accommodated, we will need to reconsider the partnership timeline. It was polite, professional, and absolutely devastating. The email was addressed to Derek, with the board copied. Patterson's CEO called an emergency meeting within an hour. Derek tried to spin it. This is normal client anxiety during transitions. Kyle just needs more time to build rapport. How much time? The CEO asked. Because this email suggests they're ready to walk. They're bluffing, Derek insisted. I sat quietly at the table, saying nothing. What do you think? The CEO asked me directly. I think Vertex has been very clear about their expectations, I said carefully. They value relationship continuity. Whether we can provide that is a strategic decision above my level. Derek glared at me. The CEO turned to Derek. Fix this. Whatever it takes. This deal cannot fail. Derek's face went red. Kyle will handle it. The countdown had officially begun. 4 weeks until Vertex's decision deadline. And every day, Derek was digging himself deeper. Week 1. Kyle sent the wrong contract version to Vertex's legal team, containing outdated pricing terms. Week 2. He accidentally copied a competitor on an internal strategy email. Week 3. He missed a conference call with their CFO because he forgot about the time zone difference. Week 4. He pitched a deliverable timeline that contradicted our manufacturing capacity. Each mistake was documented. Each error was reported up the chain. And each time, Derek defended Kyle instead of fixing the problem. Meanwhile, I watched the company's internal metrics with quiet interest. Performance indicators were dropping. Client satisfaction scores were sliding. The board was asking questions. Someone leaked the quarterly performance data to a business news site. The article was titled, Patterson Industries Struggles with Leadership Transition. Derek suspected me immediately, but he had no proof. I'd been careful. My digital footprints were clean. What he didn't know was that 3 other executives were also collecting evidence against him. I wasn't his only enemy. I was just the most patient one. The anonymous metrics leak hit the board's inbox on a Friday morning. Detailed spreadsheets showing declining win rates, extended sales cycles, and deteriorating client satisfaction specifically in Derek's division, all compared against my previous 3 years of growth. The data was devastating because it was true. Derek called an all-hands meeting, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "Someone in this division is sabotaging our success," he said. "Leaking confidential data. Undermining leadership. This is corporate betrayal." He looked directly at me. "If I find out who's responsible, they'll be terminated and potentially prosecuted." I met his eyes calmly. "Have you considered that maybe the data reflects actual performance issues rather than sabotage?" The room went silent. "What did you say?" Derek's voice was dangerously quiet. "I'm just suggesting that metrics don't lie. If performance is down, perhaps the strategy needs adjustment." He took a step toward my desk. "You're on very thin ice." "I'm stating facts," I replied. "That's what you pay me for." 2 colleagues later told me they thought Derek might actually explode. But he didn't. He just walked out. That afternoon, the board requested a private investigation into divisional performance and leadership decisions. The boardroom confrontation happened 3 days later. Derek was called to explain the Vertex situation, the performance decline, and the leaked metrics. He came prepared with slides blaming market conditions, team inexperience, and resistance from legacy employees. Then he made his fatal mistake. "The real problem," Derek said, pointing at a slide with my name on it, "is that certain people can't accept new leadership. They actively undermine change because they're threatened by younger talent." The board chair, William Preston, looked at me. "You've been named. Do you have a response?" I opened my tablet and pulled up my documentation folder. "I have emails, meeting notes, and client communications covering the past 3 years," I said quietly. "I also have recordings of conversations where my contributions were deliberately erased from project records. And I have documentation of the demotion that occurred immediately after I requested a merit-based raise." Derek's face went white. "Additionally," I continued, "I have evidence of procurement irregularities and policy violations that may interest the compliance team." William Preston's expression didn't change, but his assistant started typing rapidly. "We'll need to review all of that," he said. "This meeting is adjourned pending investigation." Derek tried to follow me out, but security quietly blocked his path. I signed with Titan Point Solutions on a Monday morning. The contract included everything Victoria had promised: senior title, equity, team-building authority, and a signing bonus that made my eyes water. That afternoon I called James Sullivan at Vertex. "I wanted to let you know I've accepted a position at Titan Point Solutions," I said. "I'll be leading their new enterprise division." There was a long pause. "Interesting timing," he said. "We're actually reconsidering the Patterson deal. Their performance has been concerning." "I understand," I said carefully. "If you'd like to explore what Titan Point could offer, I'd be happy to facilitate an introduction." "Let's schedule a call for Thursday," he said. By Friday, Vertex had signed an exclusive letter of intent with Titan Point. The $30 million deal had moved with me. Patterson's stock dropped 6% when the news leaked. Derek's division had just lost its biggest potential contract, and everyone knew whose fault it was. I'd been collecting evidence of Derek's procurement fraud for months. Inflated invoices from vendor companies where his former colleagues worked. Approval shortcuts that violated bidding requirements. Expense reports that didn't match actual costs. I packaged everything carefully and submitted it to the SEC's whistleblower program and Patterson's compliance hotline. The report was confidential, anonymous, untraceable to me. Within 2 weeks, Patterson Industries received notice of a regulatory audit. The focus: procurement practices and vendor relationships in Derek's division. Derek's name appeared specifically in the investigation scope. I watched from my new office at Titan Point as Patterson's stock dropped another 4%. Shareholders were demanding answers. The board was scrambling. And Derek was drowning in legal paperwork and compliance requests. My former colleagues texted me updates. Derek had stopped sleeping. He'd started snapping at everyone. His assistant quit. The beautiful thing about consequences is they don't care about your intentions. They just compound. The journalist reached out through LinkedIn. I'm investigating a story about corporate governance at Patterson Industries. I've received anonymous documents suggesting systematic procurement fraud. Would you be willing to speak on background? I agreed to a phone call. I didn't volunteer information, but I confirmed facts when asked. I pointed her toward public records. I suggested other former employees who might have perspectives worth hearing. The article published 3 weeks later in a major business publication. Patterson Industries faces scrutiny over executives' vendor relationships. Derek was named throughout. His rapid rise. His management style. His connections to companies receiving inflated contracts. Current employees were quoted anonymously describing a culture of fear and retaliation. One paragraph mentioned, a senior female performer demoted after requesting a raise, only to watch their major deal collapse under inexperienced leadership. I didn't have to say I was that person. Everyone in the industry knew. The story went viral in our sector. LinkedIn exploded with commentary. Shareholders demanded executive resignations. Patterson's PR team went into crisis mode. But the damage was done. The exodus started quietly. First, the CFO announced early retirement. Then the head of operations took a sabbatical. The general counsel resigned for personal reasons. Everyone was running from the investigation. Nobody wanted their name attached to Derek's disaster. Derek was isolated. The executives who'd once supported him were now treating him like radioactive waste. I heard through back channels that he tried to call board members directly. They refused his calls. He tried to schedule meetings with the CEO. Cancelled. He even reached out to former colleagues for advice. They ghosted him. When you build your career on dominance instead of relationships, you learn the hard way that nobody rushes to save you when you're drowning. 3 of my former team members called asking if Titan Point was hiring. They wanted out before the ship fully sank. I told them to send resumes. Loyalty is a two-way street, and they'd always treated me with respect. Derek, meanwhile, was completely alone. The call came at 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday. Derek's name appeared on my phone screen. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Hello. I need your help. His voice was ragged, desperate. Please. I said nothing. The board is blaming me for everything, he continued. The Vertex deal, the stock drop, the investigation. They're making me the scapegoat. Are you the scapegoat? I asked quietly. Or are you responsible? I made mistakes, okay? But I was under pressure. The board wanted aggressive growth. I delivered that. By demoting your best performer and losing the company's biggest deal. Silence. I'll make it right, he said desperately. I'll recommend you for reinstatement. Promotion. Whatever you want. Just tell the board you'll come back. Tell Vertex you made a mistake leaving. I pulled up my recording app. Do you remember our coffee meeting? Yes. When you told me you had to establish dominance. I played the recording. His own voice filled the silence. I had to establish dominance when I came in. The previous leadership was too soft. He made a sound like he'd been punched. That's who you are, I said. Own it. Hung up. He called back 17 times. I blocked the number. The lawsuits came in waves. First, Vertex sued Patterson for breach of good faith negotiations and misrepresentation of personnel. Then vendors whose contracts were cancelled during the investigation sued for wrongful termination of agreements. Then shareholders filed a class action claiming leadership negligence caused stock value decline. My documentation became central evidence in multiple cases. The emails, the recordings, the timeline of Derek's decisions. Patterson's legal team requested my cooperation. I agreed, providing everything I had. Not to help them, to ensure the truth was preserved in legal record. Derek was suspended pending investigation outcomes. His LinkedIn profile suddenly listed him as between opportunities. I watched it all unfold from the safety of Titan Point's executive floor, where I was building a team, closing deals, and receiving congratulatory messages from industry contacts. The universe has a way of correcting imbalances. Sometimes it just needs someone patient enough to document the journey. The board meeting was broadcast to shareholders via webcast. I watched from my office. William Preston's face was grave as he addressed the camera. After thorough investigation, the board has terminated Derek Hastings for cause. Evidence showed systematic policy violations, retaliation against high-performing employees, and decisions that directly damaged shareholder value. He continued. Specifically, the demotion and marginalization of a senior female account executive led to the loss of our largest potential contract and subsequent reputation damage. This represents a failure of leadership judgment that the board cannot overlook. Derek's name would forever be associated with corporate failure. The stock initially jumped 3% on news of his termination. The market had been waiting for accountability. My phone buzzed with messages from former Patterson colleagues. Justice served. About time. He got what he deserved. I felt no joy watching his career implode. But I felt no guilt either. Actions have consequences. He'd chosen his. I'd simply documented them. 6 months into my role at Titan Point, I closed the Vertex deal. $30 million, just as projected. But Titan Point's structure allowed for performance bonuses, so my personal compensation from that deal alone exceeded my entire previous year's salary at Patterson. The CEO announced my promotion to Global Director of Strategic Partnerships at the company all-hands meeting. The role came with expanded team authority, international travel, and stock options that would vest into serious wealth. Industry publications ran features about the deal. Titan Point scores major win with Vertex partnership. My LinkedIn profile exploded with connection requests. Recruiters called constantly. Former Patterson colleagues reached out, some congratulating me, others asking how I'd managed such a dramatic career reversal. I told them the truth. Document everything, know your worth, and never let someone else define your value. 3 of my best former team members joined Titan Point under my leadership. They'd waited out Derek's tenure, then jumped ship the moment they could. We were building something real. Something based on mutual respect instead of fear. I saw him at the National Sales Leadership Conference in Austin. Derek was standing near the registration table, looking uncomfortable in a suit that didn't fit quite right anymore. He'd lost weight. His hair was grayer. He saw me approaching and his face went through several expressions. Recognition, shame, anger, resignation. "Congratulations on Vertex," he said quietly. "I heard you closed it." "Thank you," I replied. "I'm doing consulting now," he said, unprompted. "Helping smaller firms with growth strategies. It's actually very rewarding." The lie hung between us like fog. "I wonder," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "if you'd be willing to serve as a reference. You know my capabilities. The demotion situation was complicated, but you know I can deliver results." I looked at him for a long moment. This man had publicly humiliated me, stolen my work, smeared my reputation, tried to destroy my career because I asked for fair compensation. And now he wanted me to help him. "No," I said simply. "Replaceable people don't give references." His eyes filled with tears. Security was escorting him out as I walked away. Apparently he hadn't paid his conference registration fee. He tried to talk his way in, claiming previous speaker status would cover him. Didn't. I watched through the glass doors as he stood on the sidewalk, looking lost. A man who'd once commanded boardrooms now couldn't afford a $400 conference ticket. The fall from power isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just quiet, grinding erosion until there's nothing left. I didn't feel victorious watching him leave. Felt calm. Complete. Karma doesn't always look like justice. Sometimes it just looks like consequences catching up. I turned back to the conference hall where people were gathering for the keynote. Several colleagues waved me over. A former client wanted to discuss a new project. A journalist requested an interview about leadership transitions. My life had moved on. Derek's hadn't. And that, ultimately, was the real revenge. 6 of my former Patterson team members now worked under my leadership at Titan Point. We'd built something special. A culture where performance mattered more than politics. Where raises were based on results, not favoritism. Where people were celebrated, not replaced. I thought about what Derek had cost himself by choosing dominance over development. The talent he'd lost. The deals that collapsed. The reputation destroyed. Power built on fear is always temporary. Respect earned through fairness lasts. The investigation into Patterson's procurement fraud concluded with fines and executive departures. Derek's name appeared in every report. His career in corporate leadership was finished. Meanwhile, Titan Point's growth under my division had attracted board attention. There were quiet conversations about succession planning, about long-term leadership development. I was building legacy, not empire. And every day, I remembered what Derek had taught me. Not how to lead, but how never to lead. The best revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming so successful that your enemy's opinion becomes irrelevant. 3 years later, I received an unexpected email. It was from a vendor management firm seeking references for a consultant they'd hired. The consultant's name: Derek Hastings. The firm had a contract with Titan Point. Derek would potentially be working under oversight from my department. I stared at that email for a long time. The man who'd called me replaceable was now asking my company to employ him. The man who'd demoted me was now subject to my approval. Life had come full circle in the most poetic way possible. I approved the contract. Not because I forgave him. Because I'd moved so far beyond our history that his presence no longer threatened me. He was now a contractor. I was a global executive. We existed in different universes. If you're reading this because someone made you feel small, understand this. Document everything, know your value, play the long game, and build something so successful that their opinion becomes meaningless. Derek taught me that I was replaceable. I proved that he was. And that made all the difference.